The Founding Fathers knew that, like any other part of the government, the power of the judiciary could be abused. They never intended, for example, that the courts preempt legislative prerogatives or become vehicles for political action or social experimentation, or for coercing the populace into adopting anyone's personal view of utopia. Now, during the past 2 presidential elections, I've made it clear to the American public that I felt the courts had sometimes gone too far in interfering with the constitutional prerogatives of other branches of government, even while they neglected their constitutional duty of protecting society from those who prey on the innocent.
President Reagan's comments in an address to the U.S. attorneys are stark testimony to a concern shared by many of us throughout the nation: the obligation of the legal profession and the judiciary to defend the Founding Fathers' vision of a constitutional republic. Hello, I'm Senator Orrin Hatch. I believe that one of the most important tools in this effort is the Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy Studies. And I'd like to tell you a bit more about the Society and its role. The Society was founded in 1982 by law students at Harvard, Yale, the University of Chicago, and Stanford. In the few years of its life, it has grown into a national organization which now includes lawyers and legal scholars as well as students. The Founding Fathers understood that throughout history, governments have often put their own ambitions and convenience above the freedom of the individual and the laws of God. Our republic is premised on the principles of limited government, federalism, separation of powers, and respect for free markets in both ideas and commerce. And it is the particular duty of the legal profession, especially the judiciary, to preserve this vision of the founders as expressed in the Constitution. I believe that this duty has been largely ignored. I further believe that some judges on the high courts of this country, instead of doing their utmost to accurately interpret the Constitution, often strain that document into a justification of their own political views. And now that the American people have discredited much of the liberal agenda, activists are more than ever attempting to use the courts to pursue their goals. In the law schools, future lawyers are taught not that the courts are bulwarks of the Constitution, but that they are vehicles for social change to be used when the people refuse to vote as certain groups would like. The Federalist Society is in the forefront of the fight to reform our legal system so that it places a premium on individual liberty, traditional values, and the rule not of men, even if they are judges, but of law. The Federalist Society presently has 2 primary divisions providing leadership to the legal profession: the Student Division and the Lawyers Division. Today's Student Division has chapters at more than 80 schools, and membership has climbed above 2,000 law students. The Student Division serves several fundamental purposes. First and foremost, of course, it serves to give conservative legal principles a visible presence on campus. The Society's regular national lecture series, called the John M. Olin Lectures in Law, provided local student chapters a chance to host the best conservative legal minds in the country and helps recruit new members. The Student Division publishes a biannual law journal called the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. The Student Division also sponsors an annual national symposium on an important legal topic such as foundations of federalism, equality in the law, and the First Amendment. Here's a brief look at one memorable exchange produced by a recent symposium panel.
Subsidiary, or how do you put it?
Subsidiarity.
Subsidiarity. If there is that precept, then I presume the bishops would not be urging us to get to the governmental stage until they had come to the conclusion that all of the subsidiary elements have been exhausted. Now, I'm a practicing Catholic, and I give to the church, but I could probably give a lot more if I had known that there is really a social evil that is supposed to be remedied by one of these subsidiary organs, not government. How can you leap so quickly to the government? I mean,
well, it's not a leap that abandons the other units in society. It's not an either-or. The bishops say that the call and the responsibility for acting on these problems is at all levels. That, in fact, they say as a church we're going to do more, and we're going to call on our Catholic members to do more on a charitable and voluntary basis, that we're calling on the private corporate sector to do more, on local government and local institutions to do more, but at the same time there is inherent in some of these problems responsibility on the part of federal government. So they're calling for partnerships across all those lines and not one or the other, but to exclude the federal government.
But that's not subsidiarity. I mean,
Yes, it is.
to say while you're saying it that the federal government should get in, you're saying we know we're reaching the last stage before we've exhausted the other stages.
Well, but it's not a linear kind of judgment where you make the judgment that one level can't do it and then you abandon that and go to the next, but you do make a judgment about whether some parts of that problem are too big or too complex or of a scope that can't be handled at the local level.
And they've made that judgment.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm saying I don't know how they leapt to that judgment before they tried asking the parishes to give more. I could give more.
Well, they haven't done it before.
The list of speakers and presenters of these annual symposia and other society events is impressive and influential, and includes such figures as Chief Justice William Rehnquist, Milton Friedman, Professor Richard Epstein, Judge Frank Easterbrook, and Judge Richard Posner. I promised that you would be hearing from some other supporters of the Society, and I'd like now to introduce you to the first of them. Here's what Judge Robert Bork of the U.S. Court of Appeals had to say when asked his reaction to the Society's founding.
Provided a focus for an alternative voice, I think is a terribly important presence at these law schools, simply to express dissent from the dominant pieties. I mean, what is academic and intellectual life supposed to be? It is supposed to be a way to challenge the dominant intellectual culture. The dominant intellectual culture in our law schools is exactly what the Federalist students are challenging. So I think it's wonderful.
One thing that we learned in law school is that ideas are very important in driving the legal process and in producing changes in legal doctrines. And we found that there were no people who were talking about the ideas that we cared about the most, that we thought were the most important: limited government, constitutional decision-making by judges. In order to change that, we felt we had to have a community of people discussing those ideas, advocating them, explaining them to people who didn't understand them. The Federalist Society was designed to try to fill that need, to develop a discussion of conservative ideas about law.
None of the professors are conservative where I attend law school. Most of the students are liberal, but I believe that their ideas can be changed. They're simply mimicking what they've learned. They don't know why they believe what they do. They haven't really thought about it. That's why I, along with another student, founded a chapter at my law school to provide a forum for the exchange of ideas so that students could hear something different from what they're getting from their professors and the textbooks.
The advent of the Federalist Society in our law schools is, to me, one of the most heartening developments of recent years. The Society has brought together some of the best and brightest of our young legal talent, men and women who believe in the Constitution as a species of fundamental law, who take it seriously, who remain faithful to our founding principles. And quite frankly, that's the kind of lawyer we're looking for in the Reagan administration. And the Federalist Society has been a very valuable source of legal talent for us. The Federalists, I think it would be fair to say, occupy key offices in many of the most important divisions of the government.
I've lectured at about 10 top law schools in this country for the Federalist Society. And that small nucleus of conservative law students is really changing the debate in the law schools in this country. And I think these are the kind of law students that the top law firms in the country would seek out, and these are the kinds of students that would certainly be candidates for judgeships in this country. It is also important to note that the liberal students are getting a different point of view. Even in the heat of the debate, the Federalist Society students have maintained their posture. And I would just encourage them to continue on with the intellectual debate that I think is changing the legal education system in this country.
Impressive testimony, wouldn't you say? The Federalist Society launched its Lawyers Division in 1985. Our goal is to enroll 50,000 lawyers by 1989. Here in Washington, there is a flourishing chapter made up of some of the most talented and influential young lawyers in the city and the federal government. Several of my senior staff members on the Senate Judiciary Committee are members of the Lawyers Division, and I think their participation is essential to keeping in contact with the best legal talent and thinking. There are already Lawyers Division chapters in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston, and new ones starting in Denver, Seattle, and Detroit. This year we're launching a national legal magazine to help keep up contacts and also to report on important legal developments. The Lawyers Division will also hold an annual convention to bring together lawyers from around the country who share a belief in the rule of law and limited government as shared by the Founding Fathers. This convention will set goals for reforming the legal profession and recalling it to constitutional standards. For most lawyers, it is the local chapter that becomes the focus for their regular involvement with the society. In just a moment, you will be hearing from a group of people who have all had first-hand experience with the Lawyers Division and its activities. But first, I want to share with you a recent moment at the Washington chapter when the speaker was Attorney General Edwin Meese. As you might imagine, it was a standing room only crowd, and the national press seemed to be in full coverage.
A jurisprudence that is based on first principles is an instrument that's neither conservative nor liberal, neither right nor left. It is a jurisprudence that cares about committing and limiting to each organ of government the proper ambit of its responsibilities. It's a jurisprudence that is faithful to the Constitution itself. And by that same token, an activist jurisprudence, on the other hand, one which anchors the Constitution only in the consciences of jurists, is a chameleon jurisprudence, changing color and form in every era. The same activism that it may be hailed today may threaten the capacity on a different occasion or in the future for decision through a democratic consensus tomorrow, as in fact it has many times in the history of our country. Ultimately, as the early Democrats wrote into the Massachusetts state constitution, the best defense of our liberties is a government of laws, not of men. There is a great temptation for those who view this debate that we're talking about today, from the outside particularly, to see it as a clash of personalities or a bitter battle. But you and I hope the other participants in this dialogue, know better about what it should be. We and our distinguished opponents should be, and I hope we will, carrying on the old tradition of free, uninhibited, and vigorous debate. Because out of that level of argument, well, there will be no losers. There will only be one winner, the truth. I would suggest to you that that's the American way, and I suspect that the founders wouldn't want it any other way. Thank you.
The Federalist Society plays an enormously important role today. Law students and lawyers coming together to discuss their ideas on limited government and on individual freedom. In the development of these ideas, we are preparing a new generation to enter the public policy process. I welcome their entrance. I welcome the increasing influence of the Federalist Society in Washington and throughout the country.
As president of the D.C. Lawyers Division of the Federalist Society, I know the contribution that the Federalist Society has made to the debate about limited constitutional government in this country. This debate has occurred everywhere throughout the country where chapters of the Federalist Society have been organized on college campuses and communities and elsewhere. We can continue this progress. We can continue to see that the perspective that we bring to the debate about constitutional values is continued as the Federalist Society is expanded throughout the country.
Now law students who were in the Federalist Society while they were in law school can graduate, join with established lawyers in the Lawyers Division, and begin to form a real national conservative legal network. Such networking can help ensure that good judges get on not only the federal bench, but on the neglected state benches as well. It can provide legal talent in local controversies, and it can change the intellectual and political atmosphere in which American lawyers practice.
For generations, there has been a liberal bias in our public schools, our universities, and our law schools. This has produced a very overwhelming and pervasive liberal bias in our legal profession, particularly among those who are activists, who are organized, and who seek to influence our society and our legal institutions. Now the Federalist Society, particularly the Lawyers Division, gives lawyers of the other side, from the other side of the political spectrum, an opportunity to meet with one another, to have some influence, to hear speakers, and to work together to change the left-leaning bias of the legal profession.
I believe that the Founders bequeathed to us a government uniquely respectful of the equal dignity and natural liberty of men created in the image of God. I do not believe that the defense of the Constitution is a casual matter. I believe that it is our most important political work, that the defense of free markets, of our religious freedoms, of the right of parents to pass their values along to their children without the interference of government, and the defense of democracy are all subsumed in the struggle for the Constitution. For me, this is the most important fight, and I believe that the Federalist Society is the single most important addition to this fight in decades. Allow me to introduce you to one more group of friends who feel as strongly as I do about the importance of the Society.
I think that the Federalist Society is providing a very reasoned counterbalance and counterpoise to some of the existing groups that in all candor, and I don't mean in any way to disparage them, but basically feel like they have some kind of a perpetual lease on commitment to civil rights and on how to go about correctly thinking about civil rights. So I think the Federalist Society is a very positive development in the area of civil rights first, but certainly in every other area of the law.
I think the growth of the Federalist Society as an organization within the law schools and within the legal profession is a terribly important development, both because it offers up some hope for internal reform, so to speak, and also because it provides a forum for a much broader consideration of questions of the proper role of courts, the proper role of law in society. What do we mean by when we say that we're proud to be a society that governs itself under a constitution?
I think the Federalist Society is both intellectually and programmatically the single most important phenomenon in not just legal education. I think it not hyperbole to say darn near in the law itself today. For one, it's a great institution to season young lawyers to go against the grain. Can't get better training as a professional lawyer than to learn to go against the grain. It's an institution that I see clearly as I talk to students in the Federalist Society, an institution which provides support and good intellectual fellowship and challenge.
As a Society board member, I would say that we are truly pleased with what we have accomplished so far. But our task has only begun. We want to appeal to all those who share the Society's belief in individual liberty, limited constitutional government, the separation of powers, and the rule of law to join in our efforts. We want to encourage them to participate by speaking out and joining in the public debate and discussion.
I have committed myself to doing everything I can to help the Federalist Society, to expanding the student division, to making the new Lawyers Division a national force, and to making the Federalist Society as much of a household word and a far better influence than the ACLU. As you can see, I'm committed.
I intend to go right on appointing highly qualified individuals of the highest personal integrity to the bench, individuals who understand the danger of short-circuiting the electoral process and disenfranchising the people through judicial activism. I want judges of the highest intellectual standing who harbor the deepest regard for the Constitution and its traditions, one of which is judicial restraint.